Hi, my name is Salah, and 10 years, 10 whole years. I stayed away thinking my father was doing just fine without me. But the moment I opened that door, I saw him, curled up on the floor like an unwanted stray, wearing a torn shirt, shivering, humiliated in his own home. While inside, my stepmother toasted champagne with her children, laughing, calling him a useless servant. And my stepbrother? He threw soup in my father's face. That's when I realized they didn't just lie to me all these years. They broke him, piece by piece. So now I'm asking you, would you have walked away, or would you have stayed and made them regret everything? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And have you ever been betrayed by your own family? Drop a comment, because this story doesn't end the way they thought it would. It had been 10 years since I last saw the house. Ronan drove slowly down the street, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other reaching for mine every so often. I hadn't said much on the flight from London or during the 3-hour drive from the Austin airport. I think he knew not to push. Some things settle like dust. You try to move too fast and you just choke on it. We turned the final corner, and there it was. The same old white single-story home on the outskirts of San Antonio. Same cracked driveway. Same rusted mailbox I once painted when I was 13. But everything else? It felt wrong, like someone had gutted the house and kept its skin. Ronan eased the car to a stop. The sun was just starting to dip. That soft orange light made the peeling paint look almost golden. For a second, I wanted to pretend it was still home. But then I saw him. My father was sitting on the front step, knees pulled to his chest, a threadbare shirt hanging off his bony shoulders. He looked small, like the man I once admired had been shrunk down and left out in the cold too long. I opened the door and stepped out before I could think. The air smelled like warm asphalt and cut grass. Familiar, but the scene in front of me was anything but. He didn't look up. His arms were shaking, hands wrapped around something in his lap. I walked closer. It was a napkin, blue, folded into a triangle. A simple thing. I used to fold them that way for him when I packed his lunch for work. He always said it made the sandwich taste better. Because love changes flavor, he'd joke. My chest tightened. Daddy? My voice cracked. He lifted his head slowly, eyes dull. It took him a second, like his mind had to jog through years of silence before it reached me. Then, recognition. Barely. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Behind me, Ronan got out of the car. He said nothing, but his presence grounded me. Steady. Safe. "Come on, let's get you inside," I said to my father, crouching beside him. I touched his shoulder and felt the bones, sharp and wrong. He flinched at first, then leaned into my hand. I helped him stand. He was barefoot. I swallowed hard. The door was slightly open. As we stepped in, the noise hit us like a slap. Laughter, loud voices, glasses clinking. Music playing too loud for a family home on a quiet street. The living room was packed with people. Faces I didn't recognize at first, until I did. Lorena's sisters, cousins, her grown nieces, all of them sprawled across the furniture like they owned it. And in a way, they did now. Lorena stood near the kitchen, holding a wine glass, mid-toast. Her voice rang out above the noise. "To a house well kept, even if the old man sweeping the porch thinks he's still the king of it." They laughed, like hyenas, like the cruelty was entertainment. Gideon, my father, had just shuffled in behind me, head down. A man I vaguely remembered as one of Lorena's nephews shouted, "Hey, the servant's back from his nap." Another chuckle. Then Miles appeared. My stepbrother. He used to be shy, soft-spoken, but now he had the look of someone who liked being loud in a room full of drunk relatives. He held a bowl, soup, maybe stew, And before I could say a word, he tossed it. The bowl didn't hit him, but the soup splattered across Gideon's pants, steaming, staining the thin fabric. Oops, Miles smirked. Guess his hands don't work anymore. Time slowed. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. I just froze. All those years away, I'd imagined this moment so many times. I thought I'd come in, dramatic and righteous, fists clenched, ready to defend him. Instead, I stood still, watching the man who taught me how to ride a bike wipe soup off his knees like a beaten employee. Ronan moved. He didn't say anything, just took a step forward into the center of the room. It was like someone hit mute on the whole house. The laughter died, conversations stopped. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. Lorena's eyes landed on him. Her smile faltered. Ronan didn't need to raise his voice. His presence spoke for him. Tailored coat. Watch that cost more than this whole neighborhood. Calm, collected menace. Nobody knew who he really was, because I never told them. To them, he was just a man with good posture and sharp shoes. But I knew better. He looked around slowly, scanning every face. Then his eyes met mine, and something passed between us. Not pity, not rage, just a question. Are you ready? Because this wasn't just a reunion, it was an excavation. And in that frozen silence, I realized this was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. Ronan turned his head toward me slowly, as if asking whether I was ready to hear the truth I had avoided for 10 years. But it wasn't a question, it was a signal. His eyes scanned the room once more, calm as ever, but sharp enough to slice through concrete. I could feel it then. He already understood more than I had told him. He had read the dynamics, the hierarchy, the cruelty, all in a matter of seconds. My hands moved before my mind caught up. I stepped around the mess on the floor and knelt beside my father, who was still bent over, wiping soup from his pants with trembling fingers. The napkin he had carried outside was now stained and limp on the floor. I picked it up, folded it back the way I used to, and gently placed it in his hand. Every pair of eyes in the room was on us, like we were putting on a play, some watching with smug amusement, others trying to look away but failing. Lorena chuckled into her wine glass. "Dramatic much?" she muttered to no one in particular. I glanced down again at my father's wrist as I helped him to his feet. There, just below the edge of his shirt sleeve, was a faded bruise, not fresh, not accidental. The kind that happens when someone grabs too hard, too often. Something cracked quietly inside me. For years, I had convinced myself that distance was protection, for both of us. I told myself that he was fine, that Lorena might be difficult, but he was strong enough to manage her. I believed the words he said on the phone, the ones filled with pauses and sighs. I wanted to believe them. It was easier that way. But now, standing here with his frail arm in my hand and that bruise staring up at me like an accusation, I couldn't ignore the truth. I had left him here, with her, with them. The guilt settled in slow and thick. It wasn't the first time I had felt it. A memory surged, sharp and unwelcome. I was 23, home from college for winter break. The front door had barely closed behind me when I noticed it. The living room looked different. The walls once covered with framed photos of my childhood, of my parents, of birthdays and Sunday mornings, were now filled with portraits of Lorena's sisters, her grandniece's wedding, and some oil painting of a sailboat that no one in this landlocked town had ever set foot on. I found my father standing by the stairs, watching as Lorena directed 2 men to move furniture. "This house needs a woman who knows what she's doing," she said with a laugh, not even glancing at him. He didn't respond, just stood there, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped like I'd never seen before. Later that night, I went to the garage to get something from my car and saw a box shoved into the corner near the water heater. My name was written on the side in faded Sharpie. Inside were my childhood journals, a handmade photo frame I made in 3rd grade, and a sweater my mom had knitted before she passed. I confronted Lorena the next morning. "Why is my stuff in the garage?" She didn't look up from her coffee. "You're grown now. There's no need for so many reminders of you here." Her tone was so casual, so practiced, it made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. I should have stayed then. I should have fought. Instead, I packed a bag and returned to campus early. A few months later, I moved overseas. I tried not to think about what came next, until another moment, years later, pulled me back into that same gut-deep ache. It was a phone call. I had just settled into a job in Madrid. The time difference meant I usually called home on weekends. But that Tuesday afternoon, I felt a pull and dialed anyway. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, but his voice, it wasn't the one I remembered. It was thin, controlled, like someone listening in. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm fine. Everything's good here," he answered quickly. But then I heard it, muffled in the background, Lorena snapping something about the laundry. And just like that, he whispered, "Don't worry about me," and hung up. I should have known. I did know. I just didn't want to see it. Back in the present, I rose slowly, steadying my father on his feet. He leaned in and whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear, "Please don't start anything." Those 4 words did something strange to me. They didn't calm me down, they broke something open. He had learned to fear conflict, to beg for quiet, and that wasn't the man who raised me. "I'm here," I whispered back, my hand gripping his a little tighter. "You don't have to say anything. I've got you now." Lorena tapped her wine glass with the back of a spoon like she was hosting a wedding reception. "If you're done with your little reunion, you're interrupting our family dinner." From the back, Miles added with a chuckle, "If the help's gonna make a scene, maybe take it outside next time." My ears rang, not from volume, but from restraint. My jaw clenched so hard it ached. I could feel the words rising in my throat, bitter and hot, ready to burn the entire room down. But I didn't speak, not yet. Ronan stepped behind me, positioning himself like a sentry between Miles and my father. He didn't say a word, didn't even glance their way. He just stood there, tall and unmoved. And somehow that silence said more than shouting ever could. The atmosphere shifted. People sat up straighter. Someone turned down the music. Even Lorena looked for the first time slightly unsure. I glanced at Ronan, and in that moment, I understood. He wasn't just here to support me. He was here to remind them that I was no longer alone, that this time they weren't just up against me. And just when I thought the humiliation had reached its peak, Lorena stepped closer and revealed something I never expected to hear. Lorena didn't step back when she came closer. She lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret meant to bruise, not to be heard. And even though the room was noisy with dishes clinking and chairs scraping, I caught every word. "You should have stayed gone." For a moment, it felt like the air in my chest thinned. Not enough to stop me from breathing, just enough to let something cold settle in. I didn't let my face change. I'd learned long ago that reacting too quickly only fed her. I shifted just enough to guide my father behind me, keeping my hand steady on his arm. His weight leaned into me more than I expected, and I adjusted to hold him without drawing attention. Miles noticed and rolled his eyes like the entire moment bored him. Lorena crossed her arms, that crooked smile hovering on her lips. She still believed she owned this house, this room, this dynamic. "Why?" I said evenly. "Is my father living on the floor?" Her smirk didn't falter. "Oh, Sella, you always phrase things in the most dramatic way. Your father insists on helping around the house. He sleeps where he wants, does small chores, keeps him busy." Busy, I repeated softly, trying not to raise my voice. Is that what you're calling it? Well, she said with a shrug, turning toward the table where her relatives were watching. It's not like we had any support after you left. We had to manage everything. I blinked. What are you talking about? She lifted her chin with an innocence so false it almost glittered. The account you set up? It was closed years ago. Your father signed the release himself. The words hit me sideways. That's not possible, I said quietly. I never canceled anything. Her response was casual, as if she were discussing a pantry item that had gone stale. The paperwork is all settled. You don't need to worry. But I did worry, because none of this made sense. I stepped a little closer to my father. Dad, did you sign anything? His eyes moved downward, unable to meet mine. His lips parted, but no sound came. And that silence, more than anything he could have said, told me the truth. Miles spoke up before I could. He needed guidance. Mom handled the paperwork. He gets confused about forms. You know how he is. I knew exactly how he was. Patient, gentle, careful. Someone who used to read every line of a document twice before signing. And now he apparently needed others to tell him where his own money should go. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't expected. Years ago, my father had stood in the kitchen, adjusting his glasses while sorting through mail. I'd offered to help, but he waved me off. Lorena says she's better with forms, he'd said lightly. She says I slow things down. Back then, it sounded like a simple comment. Now it felt like the beginning of something stolen piece by piece. Ronan stepped forward, his presence anchoring the room again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He simply asked, "Where are those documents now?" The question froze Lorena mid-breath. She hadn't expected him to speak. She'd assumed he was just another polite husband standing in the background. Miles tried to jump in. There's no need. Ronan didn't even turn toward him. His silence held more authority than any argument. My mind pieced everything together faster than my heart could keep up. The missing financial support, my father's frail condition, the way Lorena strutted around this house like she paid the mortgage, the family treating him like a servant, the old bruise on his wrist. This wasn't disrespect. This was control. This was exploitation. Lorena's tone sharpened as she tried to regain footing. Selah, you're being unreasonable. After everything we've done while you were off living your best life, you show up and insult us? You abandoned the family. I never abandoned my father, I said, steady, calm. Those words landed with weight. Chairs stopped moving. Forks paused midair. Even the music from the kitchen faded into the background, like the house itself was listening. Lorena opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Miles leaned back in his seat, let out a short laugh, and said something that made every piece of the puzzle fall into place. He works for us now. Isn't that obvious? Miles tossed the words like they were a joke meant to entertain the room, not detonate it. But they did. In my chest, behind my eyes, somewhere deep in the space between memory and rage. The laughter that followed was short-lived. It wasn't loud, just a few chuckles from the end of the table, but they rang through me like glass cracking. I stared at Miles. What do you mean he works for you? He leaned back in his chair, looking far too pleased with himself. Well, someone's got to mow the lawn, run errands, keep the place from falling apart. He said he wanted to be useful, so we let him be. Lorena chimed in without missing a beat. It's better this way, keeps him busy, gives him purpose. I looked over at my father, his shoulders hunched, his hands twitching slightly at his sides, like he wasn't sure where to put them. The torn shirt, the quiet, the way he stood too still, like movement had to be earned. And suddenly, I felt sick. Not the kind of sick you can swallow down, the kind that burns. My stomach turned, my skin went cold. I walked slowly toward the kitchen. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it, taped to the wall next to the fridge, right above the recycling bin. A piece of paper, lined, titled in bold black ink, Weekly Tasks, Gideon. I stepped closer. My heart started to thud like a drum with no rhythm. Laundry, MTTH yard work, wed sat grocery errands, Mon-Fry windows, every Sunday, porch sweeping, daily. No notes about breaks, no mention of pay, not even one single checkbox marked off. "Who made this?" I asked, still facing the paper. Ronan's voice came from behind me. "Was it you, Lorena?" Lorena crossed her arms. "I wrote it. So what?" He asked for structure. Ronan didn't blink. "You created a labor schedule for a man you don't pay in a house that technically isn't yours." The room stilled again, like it had in the doorway, like the moment right before a storm hits the glass. My father's voice cracked through the tension. "They're helping me stay useful." I turned to him. "They give me things to do," he added, quieter now. "It's better than sitting around." There was no anger in his voice, no resentment, just resignation, like he truly believed this was all he was good for now. That's when it hit me. He didn't even see it anymore. The line between support and subjugation had been blurred long ago. He thought this was kindness. He'd been taught to think less of himself. I stepped away from the kitchen wall and looked at Lorena. "This isn't help. This is control," she scoffed. "You're twisting everything. If you had stuck around instead of jetting off to Europe, maybe you'd know what this family actually needed." My voice stayed even, though I had to push it through my teeth. I never imagined my father would be treated like this. And then the doorbell rang. Ronan moved toward the door before anyone else could. I heard it open, heard the sound of gravel under soft shoes, then a familiar voice from across the street. "Hey there," the woman said cheerfully. "Package came to our porch again." Then she paused. "Oh, I didn't know the help worked this late." I was still standing in the kitchen, but the words hit me like she'd whispered them directly in my ear. I stepped forward just in time to see her smile and hand Ronan a small box. She gave a friendly nod to the living room, like nothing was wrong, like my father, standing there in a torn shirt and bare feet, was just part of the scenery. "Thank you," Ronan said, taking the box. His tone was polite. His jaw was locked. The woman walked off, waving. Lorena beamed, like the neighbor had just confirmed everything she'd been saying, like she'd won. I froze, for one breath, then another, then a third, and just like that, something in me shifted. It wasn't rage, not the screaming kind. It wasn't panic. It was deeper, still. I finally understood what I was looking at. My father's identity had been rewritten, not just inside these walls, but across the street, down the sidewalk, among neighbors who had known us for years. He had been erased, slowly and publicly. Ronan closed the door and turned toward me. He lowered his voice. "How long has this been going on?" I looked at my father. "Too long," I said. And then Lorena made a mistake. She walked over to Gideon, touched his arm like she was guiding a child, and said, "Go on, get back outside." The moment Lorena's hand closed around my father's arm, something inside me shifted. Not a loud break, not an explosion, more like a clean tear somewhere deep, the kind you don't notice until it starts to burn. I moved without thinking. My hand came up between them, blocking hers before she could push him toward the door. I felt Gideon's arm tremble under my touch as I drew him gently behind me. Miles sighed dramatically. "Here we go." Lorena tilted her head, amusement flickering across her face like she'd been waiting for this. She truly believed I wouldn't stand up to her. But I straightened, keeping my voice steady. "He's not going anywhere." You could have heard a pin drop. Even the people at the dining table stopped fiddling with their silverware. It was the first time in years I had challenged Lorena out loud, and everyone knew it. She folded her arms. You suddenly care because you brought your rich husband home? That it? I didn't let the jab land. I care because he is my father. The way the words hung in the air, simple, direct, undeniable, shifted the whole room. Somewhere in the back, a chair creaked as someone leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen next. Lorena gave a short laugh. Don't pretend like you've been part of this family. I didn't raise my voice. If either of you touches him again, you'll answer to me. The calmness in my tone seemed to rattle her more than shouting ever could. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Behind me, I heard my father whisper, "Sela, please don't make trouble." That cut deeper than anything Lorena had done. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for me. Years of punishment had trained him to believe that defending him would only lead to consequences. I turned slightly, looking at him. Dad, you're not the one causing trouble. But inside, my thoughts were spiraling. I could feel doubt tugging at me, quiet but persistent. What if I had no right to intervene this way? What if I was too late? What if everything they said about him needing guidance had a grain of truth? I'd been gone for so long. Maybe I didn't understand the situation as well as I thought. Maybe I was about to make things worse. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear of them, but from fear that I might fail him again. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ronan motion for me. Just a small gesture, subtle enough that Lorena didn't notice. I stepped toward him, and he slipped something into my hand, a folded document. "Found it behind a frame," he whispered. I opened it slowly, shielding it with my body. It was a financial form, old, creased at the edges. My father's signature wobbled across the bottom, barely legible. At first, nothing stood out. Then I saw the date. The day he supposedly signed it. He had been in the hospital. I remembered that week with painful clarity. He'd been unable to hold a pen without shaking. He couldn't have signed anything, let alone a legal document transferring rights. My chest tightened. This wasn't just manipulation. Something far uglier had been happening behind these walls. I met Ronan's eyes. His expression told me he'd reached the same conclusion. Lorena finally noticed the paper. Her voice sharpened. "What's that in your hand?" I folded it once and slipped it behind my back. "Nothing you need to worry about." I didn't raise my chin the way she did when she wanted to look powerful. I didn't need to. My voice carried enough certainty to make her stiffen. For the first time since stepping foot in this house, I felt the fear sliding away, replaced by something steady and sharp. Resolve. Ronan leaned closer, his voice low enough only I could hear. "If you're ready, it's time you see the rest." I followed Ronan into the hallway, the paper still clutched in my hand, edges damp from how tightly I held it. The house felt colder than it had minutes ago, not in temperature, but in presence, as if it knew I finally saw it for what it really was. The soft hum of the overhead lights buzzed against the silence. Footsteps from the dining room faded behind us as we turned a corner, where the shadows grew thicker, the walls narrower. He stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. I hadn't stepped into that room since before Lorena moved in. The doorknob stuck a little, like it hadn't been used in a long time, and when Ronan finally pushed it open, the stale air hit us like breath held too long. "This was your dad's study, right?" Ronan asked quietly. I nodded, stepping inside. It was like time had paused here, except not gently. Dust covered the bookshelves. Stacks of old boxes leaned into each other like tired shoulders. A chair sat pushed under the desk, but the rug beneath it was rolled halfway back, like someone had dragged it roughly at some point and never bothered to fix it. I turned toward Ronan. "He hasn't been allowed in here, has he?" He didn't answer with words, just gave a slow, silent shake of his head. I crossed the room, brushing dust off a stack of manila folders. The top one held unopened mail. Some of it was mine, birthday cards, letters from when I lived overseas, all addressed to Gideon, none opened, all buried. I sat down slowly and picked up an envelope with my handwriting. I remembered writing it from a quiet cafe in Lisbon, telling him I missed him, asking about the yard, the garden, the birds he used to feed. He never read it. I didn't realize I was crying until one tear slipped off my chin and spotted the ink. Ronan crouched beside the desk and slid open a lower drawer. After a moment, he reached in, felt around, and pulled out something small wrapped in black electrical tape. A USB drive. He handed it to me without a word. I glanced at the old laptop sitting on the corner of the desk, still plugged in. It looked like no one had touched it in years, but when I opened the lid, the screen blinked to life with a faint whir. I inserted the drive. Folders popped up immediately, each labeled by date. Ronan moved closer behind me as I clicked one open. Video files. Dozens. The first one played without sound. It showed the front yard. The camera was mounted somewhere near the garage, angled down. Miles stood over my father, yelling. Gideon was bent over, pulling weeds with bare hands. It was raining. I clicked another, this one from inside. Lorena taking something out of his hands, his phone. Gideon reached slightly, but she slapped his hand away and walked off. Another, him scrubbing the kitchen floor, while the family sat at the table laughing, eating, stepping over him like he wasn't even there. I covered my mouth. Ronan rested a hand on my shoulder. You can't save him if you underestimate them. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood. This wasn't new. This wasn't recent. They'd been erasing him, piece by piece, for years. He didn't forget who he was. They made him forget. I sat back in the chair, my hands trembling. A wave of guilt pulled through me. I used to tell myself he was just tired, that maybe he liked keeping busy, that maybe Lorena was harsh, but efficient. I had believed the story because it was easier than asking what it cost him. I pulled the blue napkin from my pocket, the one he'd folded and tucked into my hand when I arrived. I hadn't even looked at it then. There, faint in pen, were 3 words in his handwriting. I knew you'd come. I closed my eyes, steadied my breath. He held on. Now it was my turn. The door behind us slammed open. Lorena stormed in, Miles at her heels. Her voice was sharp. What are you doing in here? She spotted the screen. Her face changed. This room is locked for a reason. Miles stepped forward, reaching for the laptop. I pulled it into my lap. Don't! He froze, unsure. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't begging. Just holding my ground, clear and solid. You're trespassing, Lorena barked. You don't live here. You can't be in this room. I stood slowly. Then call the police. She blinked. Go ahead, call them. I'd love to show them what's on this drive. Miles took a step back. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lorena's expression twisted, trying to regroup. He's confused. He's old. You know how he is. These clips, they're taken out of context. But her voice was higher than usual. Less control, more desperation. She'd lost her grip, and she knew it. I watched you take his phone, I said, voice steady. I watched him work in the rain while you laughed. You don't understand, she snapped. He needs structure. He needs people around. You mean control, I said quietly. Behind me, Ronan stepped forward, placing himself squarely between me and Miles. If you touch her, he said, calm and slow, we end this tonight. The hallway had filled. Lorena's sister hovered behind her. One of the cousins poked their head around the corner. Everyone was watching now, and for the first time they looked uncertain, even scared. The house had shifted again, but this time the walls weren't hiding anything. And then Lorena, in a final burst of desperation, pointed at me with trembling anger and shouted, "He signed everything over because he knew you'd never come back." The words exploded in the air, hanging there like broken glass. I didn't answer. I couldn't, not right away. My throat closed up, and for a split second, I felt the old guilt sink its claws into my spine. It was like being back on a long flight, staring out over the Atlantic, knowing I hadn't called in months. The birthdays I missed, the hospital visits I never asked about, the holidays I pretended were too complicated. Maybe he did think I'd never come back. Lorena knew exactly where to hit, and she struck hard. I stared down at the carpet, trying to breathe through the heaviness spreading across my chest. I heard Ronan shift beside me, but he didn't speak. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was loaded. My eyes flicked toward Gideon, still standing just beyond the doorway, his shoulders small, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his worn shirt. Did he really believe I abandoned him? "Maybe I deserved that," I whispered, more to myself than anyone. But Lorena wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her voice rising with every word. "You want the truth, Sela? He begged you to come home, over and over. He asked for you. I sent emails. You ignored them." I lifted my eyes. Her face was flushed now, not with passion, but with performance. She was building something, a version of events, a narrative. Miles joined in, louder than her. He didn't want to wait anymore. He wanted a real family. People who were here, who showed up. They were rewriting history in real time, twisting the blade with every carefully rehearsed sentence. Half-truths, manipulations, timelines I couldn't verify. They blurred facts with fiction until even I felt my grip on memory slipping. My stomach turned. Ronan leaned in, close enough that only I could hear him. "This is psychological warfare. They want you rattled." I inhaled slowly, blinked, and locked eyes with Gideon again. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was afraid. That one look broke through everything. I wasn't seeing a man who hated me for leaving. I was seeing someone who wasn't allowed to remember what really happened. I turned to face Lorena. "Dad," I said gently, "did you ever tell her you didn't want me around?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes darted toward her, then back to me. There was panic in his face. Panic that told me he wasn't sure what he was allowed to say. But finally, in the smallest voice, he shook his head. "No." Lorena stepped forward again. "He's confused. You know how he gets. He doesn't remember what he said yesterday, let alone 10 years ago." But now her voice had lost its bite. The veneer was cracking. She wasn't in control anymore. Miles, trying to regain some footing, held up a folder. "You want proof? Fine. We've got it." He flipped it open and pulled out a stack of papers, waving them like they were some kind of divine decree. "These are emails. From you, saying you didn't want the house, that you didn't want him. You gave it up. You didn't want the responsibility." He handed a few sheets to one of the cousins nearby, letting them pass it around. I walked forward and took one of the pages. My name was on it. So was my old email address. But the phrasing, "I cannot assume care for my father due to personal hardship," wasn't mine. The grammar, the tone, even the formatting, it was all wrong. Ronan leaned over my shoulder. "That's not a real header," he murmured. "No IP, no timestamp. Look here, this part's been pasted. Sloppy work." I felt my heartbeat shift. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't guilty. "Funny," I said aloud, folding the page in half. "If this was so important, why keep it hidden for a decade?" Lorena flinched. "Just for a moment, but enough. This proves you didn't want him," she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "It proves you needed a story to cover what you did." The air in the hallway shifted. Some of the extended family had started to murmur. Others looked at the floor, unsure where to stand anymore. The walls that had protected Lorena and Miles for so long were beginning to erode. Gideon stepped forward slightly. His voice trembled as he tried to speak, but Miles cut in, louder, angrier. "This is all nonsense. He's not well. He doesn't remember. Don't put words in his mouth." I stepped forward. "Let him talk." The whole house fell quiet. Gideon looked at me with wide eyes. "I don't remember signing anything," he said, barely above a whisper. "She said it was for the taxes. She said it wouldn't change anything." His hands shook. "I didn't want you gone," he continued. I thought I'd embarrass you. I didn't want to be a burden." That last word broke something open inside me. He thought he was a burden, not because I told him that, but because someone made him believe it over and over until it became real to him. And then I saw it, Miles, jaw clenched, stepping closer with fury behind his eyes. And that was the moment Miles snapped and crossed a line he could never take back. Miles charged at me, eyes wide, voice cracking with rage. "You have no right to question our family's decisions." But before his hand could reach me, Ronan stepped in with the calm of someone who'd seen too many of these moments unfold. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He just planted his body between us, like a wall. "Miles," Ronan said flatly, "don't." The room stilled, the kind of still that makes your heartbeat sound too loud in your own ears. But Miles wasn't thinking. He shoved Ronan's shoulder, not hard enough to send him flying, but enough to make a point, enough to cross a line. I heard a sharp gasp from one of the cousins behind us. Lorena's hand flew to her mouth, not in concern, but calculation, realizing what that shove could cost them. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just stayed still. My fingers still held the USB drive, like it was a key to something none of them could lock up again. Ronan caught Miles's arm mid-motion, firm but not aggressive. "Try that again," he said, voice quiet but cutting. "And this becomes a police matter." Miles yanked his arm back like it had been burned. The wildness in his eyes didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, panic mixing with the knowledge that he'd gone too far, too fast, and now had no idea how to walk it back. I stepped forward, past Ronan, past Miles, my voice steady, low but full. "This ends tonight." Lorena let out a high, brittle laugh. "You think you're saving anyone? You're tearing this family apart." She motioned toward Gideon. "He's not well, you know that. He's not thinking clearly. And you've been misled. That man beside you," she spit out, nodding toward Ronan, "is using you. You think you're strong now because of him? You're not." But her voice shook, and her eyes, they darted, the way people do when they're counting exits. I raised the USB drive. This house became a prison. For him, not a home. Her mouth opened, ready to interrupt. I didn't let her. "You lied," I said. "You forged documents. You kept him isolated, and you erased pieces of him because they didn't serve your version of the story." The room was so quiet, I could hear Gideon breathing. Shallow, uneven, and then I added calmly, "You rewrote his identity." No one spoke. A cousin shifted her weight near the hallway arch, inching back. Someone else muttered something I couldn't make out, but no one stepped forward to defend Lorena or Miles. I turned to them both. "I already sent the documents," I said. "The clips, the signatures, all of it." Lorena blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I forwarded everything to my attorney and to Ronan's security firm." Miles's face turned the color of wet cement. Lorena's wineglass tilted, slipped, and clattered against the edge of the table, shattering. "You're bluffing," Miles hissed. Ronan didn't say a word, just lifted his phone, tilted the screen toward me. A message glowed back. Investigator en route. ETA. 13 minutes. Lorena pointed at him. This is illegal, all of it. You're setting us up, ambushing us in our own home. I didn't look away. So was everything you did to him. That was when the tide shifted. You could feel it. The cousins began pulling back, physically, emotionally. One of them slipped out of the living room altogether. Another looked down at her shoes like they'd never seemed so interesting before. No one was defending them anymore. They weren't allies. They were witnesses. And no one wanted to be on the wrong side of what was coming. Miles looked around and saw it too. The isolation, the silence. And then from behind me, I heard Gideon's voice, stronger than I'd heard it in years. I didn't sign those papers. I turned. He was standing up straighter now, like the weight had started to lift, just a little. You made me believe I owed you everything, he said, looking directly at Lorena. You told me I was lucky you stayed, that no one else wanted the burden. He shook his head. I was wrong. The words didn't come with anger, just clarity. Lorena's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, even she had no comeback. I looked at her and said the words that had been building inside me since I first stepped back into that house. Dad is leaving with me tonight. Lorena jumped to her feet. You can't take him. He belongs here. I didn't raise my voice. He doesn't belong to you. She lunged forward like she was going to block us, but Ronan stepped into her path. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. Just stood there, steady as ever, and for the first time she didn't push back. Miles tried too. He stepped in with the last bit of bravado he had left, trying to tower over me. Ronan moved again, one step forward, no threat, just presence. And Miles stopped. His shoulders sagged, his face twisted. He looked around like a man drowning in a room full of people watching him sink. Lorena dropped into the nearest chair, muttering things no one bothered to catch. Excuses, explanations, the kind that only make sense to the person saying them. I walked to my father and held out my hand. He looked at it for a moment, like he wasn't sure it was real. Then he took it. As I helped my father toward the door, Lorena screamed one final sentence that froze me in place. He never wanted you back. The words hit like a slap across the heart. I stopped, my hand still holding Gideon's arm, the night air around us, suddenly too loud and too still at the same time. The porch light above us buzzed faintly. Crickets chirped out of rhythm with the tension that had knotted up in my chest. For a half second, I believed her. That same old ache in me, the part that always wondered why he never called, never reached out in a way that really meant something, opened wide like a fresh wound. I stood frozen on the edge of the porch, every childhood question surfacing all over again. But then, I turned. Gideon looked at me. His mouth trembled, but it wasn't from weakness this time. His eyes welled with something deeper than fear. He shook his head, over and over, as if that alone could erase what Lorena had just screamed. No, he whispered, voice rough but steady. I waited for you. Every day. And just like that, the old wound began to close. I felt the warmth of his words, quiet but enough. The truth, simple, honest, uncoached, cut through everything Lorena had tried to paint over. I turned back toward her. You don't get to define our relationship anymore. I didn't need to shout it. I didn't even need her to believe it. She heard the finality in my voice, though. Her expression didn't twist into rage this time. It sagged, like someone who'd finally been told they lost something they were never truly entitled to. A soft shuffle behind us signaled the arrival of red and blue lights gliding across the driveway. The police cruiser rolled in slowly, followed by an unmarked sedan. Ronan stepped up beside me just as the officer parked, exchanging a brief glance that didn't need words. Lorena tried to straighten her blouse and her posture, stumbling through her front yard in bare feet. It's a misunderstanding, she told the officer before he could even speak. We're just having a family disagreement. But her voice cracked. She was unraveling faster than she could fake composure. Miles? He vanished back inside, probably hoping if he stayed out of sight, he could stay out of consequence. A few of the male cousins quietly peeled off toward their trucks, muttering things about work in the morning and not wanting to get involved. I let the investigator speak with Gideon first. He was gentle, calm, asking questions like a person, not an authority figure. My father answered best he could, admitting that he signed papers without understanding them, that he was told it was just for taxes, that Lorena had said I was overseas and couldn't be bothered. I handed over the USB, the copies of the financial transfers, even the comparison photo of the signature I knew wasn't his. Ronan stepped in too, offering timestamps, metadata, records from emails that proved the narrative had been twisted, not just once, but over and over. It was like watching the knots in a rope loosen, strand by strand. When we finished and the last questions were asked, I wrapped my coat around my father's shoulders. The air had cooled, and he leaned into me as we stepped down the porch. Each step felt like we were moving away from something old and heavy, like dragging chains that finally started to fall off. As we reached the car, I opened the passenger side door. Gideon paused. In his hand, he was still holding the same small blue napkin, the one he'd folded in the kitchen, the one I'd left him with during our first conversation when I arrived. He hadn't let it go. He'd folded it so precisely, it looked like something sacred, something he clung to, not out of habit, but because it reminded him of me. I felt something shift deep in my chest. It wasn't joy, not exactly, more like recognition, a quiet understanding that even when everything else had been stripped from him, some part of him held on. "You kept it," I said softly. He nodded. It reminded me of when I wasn't alone. Behind us, the door slammed open again. Lorena. "You can't just take him," she screamed from the porch. Her voice was hoarse now. "He needs us. He belongs here." No one responded. Even the neighbors, a few had turned on their porch lights, watched from behind cracked windows or across trimmed hedges. None of them moved to help her, and none looked convinced. Miles stood in the shadows behind her, silent, beaten, not physically, but in spirit. He had nothing left to threaten with, and no one to back him up. I turned one last time and met her eyes. "My father needed care," I said, clear enough that even the quiet houses nearby would have heard me. "You gave him captivity." Lorena didn't scream again. She didn't cry. She just stopped talking, which for her said everything. Ronan drove us in silence. It was close to midnight by the time we reached the guest suite, a quiet little house set back behind the main property. Tucked between trees, lit softly, it felt like a world away from where we'd just been. Inside, everything was clean, warm, simple. I helped Gideon into the armchair by the window. He looked around slowly, like someone waking up in a life he hadn't dared imagine. "I don't know how to start over," he murmured. "You don't have to," I replied, kneeling in front of him. "We start together." He took my hand. His fingers trembled slightly, but they held on. A little later, after he'd washed up and changed into clean clothes Ronan had quietly provided, he sat on the edge of the bed, not quite lying down. "I always worried," he said, looking at the floor, "that I'd be a burden, that if you came back it'd be out of guilt." I sat beside him. "Dad," I whispered, feeling something rise in my throat I hadn't let out in years. "You were never a burden." He looked up. "You were the only parent I had." His lips parted, but no words came. Just tears, the quiet kind. And I cried too, not because of what had been lost, but because we'd made it here. Somehow we were still here. After he fell asleep, I stood quietly beside him for a long moment. The room was still, peaceful. The night outside had softened. I reached for the small blue napkin and folded it gently, laying it by his bed, not as a token of sorrow, but as something shared, something once his alone, now ours. I tucked the blue napkin beside his bed that night, knowing it had carried him through the worst, and now, finally, it could belong to both of us again.